How 2 years changes everything. The last time England were preparing to play South Africa, Marcus Smith was toiling away in the Premiership. Freddie Stewart was probably the most composed kid in his Year 8 marching band. Bevan Rod was yet to be randomly generated by the Rugby Challenge free algorithm, and the general rugby public loved the Springboks. Everyone outside England desperate to see them take the win. On Saturday, South Africa travelled to Twickenham with waters muddied by a weird week to face an England in willful transition. And we got a muddied game too. The sort of match where whichever side did win was probably the one that deserved to win after England let their initial control implode and the Boks just went, thank you very much. We're now going to do some violence. 2 years ago, South Africa smashed England to the tune of 32-12 and the sound of World Cup winners' medals going around necks. On Saturday, England scraped revenge by a single point late on. So, how did England get off to that excellent start and eventual composed close? And what can South Africa take from the last game of their season? Since that World Cup final, virtually every team has headed into games against South Africa with little moves and ideas about how they're going to break down the Springboks' very specific defence, but very few of them ever actually result in tries. One of the Boks defence's biggest strengths is the sheer number of fail-safes of ways to make back any ground they might give up if someone does something smart, and England were no different and the Springboks no less prepared. Just a minute into the game, Jesse Creel figures this is a pretty sexy blindside, so opts to stay flat, even though these guys probably have it covered. Marcus Smith elects to kick into the space behind Creel, so Villiers Leroux slides across to take the kick. England, however, regather it, and they have a wee little overlap here, so Mapimpi stays flat, knowing he'll need to shoot up and cut it off. This might seem small, but England have hence caused chaos in the South African backfield, something Joe Marchant spots. Leroux is on the floor, and both wingers in the line, meaning Pollard drops back, but on the left-hand side of the field. Nienaber's system is built on work rate, on every Bok running themselves into the mattress, but kicking back to back has found England a spot that would require both a high work rate and a teleporter. England begin to recycle the ball and the Bok defence snaps into shape. This here is about 90% of the perfect alignment, but Smith drops the ball off to Otoje, whose job is less to make metres and more to type as many Springboks as possible, clattering into 3, 2 of which being South Africa's key decision makers in Vermeulen and Naikani. Smith then takes it himself, with Slade following him behind to ensure the ball's super fast, making Smith's South African namesake the only forward to fold onto this side. South Africa here have enough numbers to man mark, but not enough bodies to manage the space. So, to increase the body count as per their system, Leroux slides round onto the wing, knowing Ben Youngs has the ball, so it's probably best to watch the touchline. Instead, Youngs crabs far enough to engage Quagga, and Stewart picks a brilliant line, forcing Am to join in. The Bok defence is so flat, so well engaged, England have opened up the space for a kick here. Pollard, after making the tackle, drops back into the backfield on the far side, but fails to notice Leroux entering the line, and leaves so much space open for what is a really smart kick. Unluckily for England, however, Villiers Leroux is one of the sharpest readers of the game out there, and spots this happening before Youngs has even kicked it, beating Stewart hence to the ball. Now, this was just Freddie Stewart's 5th cap, and whilst this might seem insane to drop a 20-year-old fullback in against a team who hangs more high balls than anyone else, Stewart is not built like upper 15s. In those 5 caps, Freddie Stewart is yet to drop a single high ball. I think he's yet to make a single mistake. And yet South Africa kept testing him, expecting logic to work, but it never did. Stewart is very much the find of the Autumn Nation series for any nation, but the most extraordinary thing is just how Eddie Jones found him. It all started one day when England rugby coach Eddie Jones was desperate for a copy of Crash Bandicoot 4, It's About Time. He checked all the usual sources, Game, Amazon, the lot, everywhere, but his 800 consultancy jobs all got in the way. He didn't have time. So he went straight to Hot UK Deals. Hot UK Deals is the UK's biggest community of like-minded shoppers, all of them absolutely hell-bent on getting the best deal for you and England rugby coach Eddie Jones alike. In just minutes on the site, Jones had searched, found a copy discounted at Curry's, waited up, downloaded the app, set a keyword alert, meaning that the moment a new deal on Crash Bandicoot 4 It's About Time is available, a notification is pinging onto his phone. Knowing securing a copy at the best price may require him pulling his eyes away from games for just a split second, Eddie needed a fullback who he could trust when he himself was too busy asking questions and sharing insights on hot deals, discount codes, and giving the best ones heat so they rise to the top. And you won't believe the deal he found on a human cloning kit. So with Black Friday coming up this Friday, there'll be even more deals than ever. So head to Hot UK Deals, their website, or indeed their app, by clicking the link in the description, so you too can have a moment just like Eddie Jones when he finally found that bargain copy of Crash Bandicoot 4 It's About Time. Or, indeed, like when he glanced up from his phone to see Manu Tuolangi crossing in the corner. The idea for England is very similar to what they did with the boot a few minutes earlier. I've explained the Boks defence a lot in my time, but the idea is very quickly, winger blitzes inward, everyone else drifts behind to cover the space left open, blah, 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 blah. England play from one touch line to the other, essentially just forcing inside defenders to work almost superhumanly hard as they possibly can. That's the basic plan, right? However, the margins at this level are so small, the difference ends up being just two tiny slips. South Africa read this wide crash ball to Tuolangi, but the England system still relaunches the next phase, except Smith, Stewart and May here aren't quite in sync. It's like all three are dancing to a slightly different beat. Stewart and May time their runs separate to both each other and Smith's pass, and the lack of rhythm makes it very difficult for Am, who can normally kill any attack by just hearing the drum beat alone. He's almost baffled by how unorganised this looks, how like under 16s-y this pass is, and he makes an uncharacteristic mess. May slaloming up to the 5-metre line. The ball is then phenomenally quick, and Am has a second defender straight up in his face, but he wraps uphill. Now, just keep an eye on Cobus Reinach. His job is to rush up and put pressure on the key decision makers, but after Johnny May picks and goes, he flashes back blindside the exact second Stewart leaves and wraps around. So, when the ball goes out to the other side, they're down one player to apply pressure, leaving Creel to play that role single-handedly, coming in from far away and barely touching Slade before he gets the pass away, which is probably just as well, really. But Reinach's misread is compounded by this. As the defence begins sprinting up, Andre Pollard stumbles, and it means he's half a second slower getting across to reach Tuolangi. England don't break the system down, they just put enough doubt in the mind of both halfbacks to create two tiny slips that give them the final few inches they need for Tuolangi to injure himself in the corner. And fast forward an hour, South Africa do almost exactly the same thing in the same corner to England. After the maul collapses, there's an interesting mix of Boks continuing to pin down white shirts and a few players, such as Toja here, being slow up to their feet. And it leaves England heavily concentrating around this area here. Yankees, stood here, spots this and sprints round, ordering the backline to spread out in an old-school lateral formation. Most teams would probably play a phase while Yankees organises, but South Africa just slow this one down and it works so much better. England have no time to fold. The area they cover will be wider, and Am has adapted and drifted into position perfectly so quickly. Malins does well to drift, but Am's timing and positioning essentially leaves Stewart in no man's land, and he delivers a cool as a green and gold cucumber past Mapimpi to score in the corner. And you know what happens next, don't you? You know what happens next. Am goes to give him 5 again, and Mapimpi leaves him hanging again! When is this going to end? When is Lukandi Wam going to finally get to high-five Makazole and Mapimpi? When's it going to happen? When? It was only try the Springboks scored because it's only try the Springboks needed. Every opponent this autumn tour has had spells where they've just controlled the momentum and looked totally on top of the Springboks, but England are the only side who've translated that into a 2-score lead at any point. Wales' period of dominance was worth a measly 3 to 6 points, easily eaten up by one tasty maul, and Scotland didn't even get them in front. The 2019 Springboks generally scored points through their own dominance, from smashing the opposition open, and in arm wrestle matches, from generally netting points every time the opposition's wrist wobbled slightly. The biggest step forward for the 2021 Springboks has been the ability to still score points on the back foot and keep themselves in games. Ironically, it's extremely Wales or Scotland, and it's what happened to beat those two teams. The Springbok game plan is still all about momentum, but whilst they have had more struggles to generate it than on the way to the World Cup, they've got so much better at playing without it. Likewise, for a team characterised as thugs simply because they're a no-nonsense side made up of men who could kill a chinchilla just by flicking it, they're extraordinarily disciplined. South Africa only conceded 8 penalties across 80 minutes, but if we discount the 2 taken in the air penalties late on in the game, which were, justified but unlucky, 5 of the 6 were forced by England at scrum or breakdown, and the only exception is here. If South Africa secure quick enough ball, there's a try on, and Franco Mostert gambles trying to get away from the legal clear out because it's the quickest way to secure the ball. For a different referee, Mostert gets away with this and the Springboks win the game. It's a risk almost worth taking. England, on the other hand, were so easily squeezed, most of their pingings dumb or preventable, and contempt bred more penalties. Once South Africa started to get on top, players started to get desperate, entering rucks that were already won and attempting heroic turnovers that were always going to be illegal. England looked mostly excellent on Saturday, but their desperation to be on top at all times, at the cost of, almost exploding, is a weakness that teams will look to exploit again in the Six Nations, no doubt. Because England were in pretty firm control at one point, as Freddie Stewart himself scored his second try in 2 weeks to put England 11 points ahead. The origin of this try is just fascinatingly simple. Over their first 2 autumn internationals, England had clean enough scrum ball to launch an attack off just once, here, against Australia. They set up like this and run this move, giving Smith time to pick a runner and pull some magic, and so presented with their second opportunity of the autumn against South Africa. England set up in an almost identical fashion with Slade in for Farrell. The Springboks have seen this one before, and Amon Mapimpi shoot up to shut it down, except Slade just throws a really basic miss pass instead, assuming South Africa will fall for the bluff of Smith, which they do. The Boks defence means Mapimpi will fly up and take the shot instead of drifting wide. LaRue is the only Springbok to see this coming in time, but Stewart can flick his hands and give Maylands a run for the corner. Creel is tracked across from the far wing to stop him, but he offloads, and May once again almost makes it up the try line. Damian D'Alanda then does brilliantly to slow the ball, pulling out the moment the referee tells him to and avoiding the penalty, but Sia Khaleesi makes maybe the first error of what has been an otherwise almost perfect year. England's ball is already slow as it'll be, and yet he shoves himself into the ruck. This means Youngs can target both him and Reinach on his little run, the scrum half standing back whilst Mapimpi flies up to cut off any action. This leaves a tiny hole between Reinach and Mapimpi that Stewart can power through, Khaleesi unable to do anything until it's too late. Seemingly weirdly, this is the way to beat the Springbok defence. The Kanyaram is such a smart defender, the only thing he won't see coming is something so simple, it's borderline too stupid to ever occur to him. It's equally weird, looking back on the Springboks 2021, it's been a year quite unlike any other. It's been one of the most memorable 12 months they'll ever have, but for only like 60% the right reasons. Whereas England, Wales, Australia have blooded new players and built some depth this last year, South Africa's selection has often felt very conservative, picking the strongest 15 for almost every single game. Until you look back on it and realise at the beginning of the year, the retirement of Tendam Tauriwa seemed monumental. A 15 without Faf or lacking PSDT seemed unthinkable, and the likes of Jasper Wiese, Joseph Dweba, Afalele Farsi had yet to taste Test rugby. Now, none of those things are the case. Oxenshea has been one of the real discoveries of the year alongside Stewart across world rugby, and Yankees and Reinach have generally deputised incredibly well for Faf de Klerk. They may not have prioritised building, but the Springbok side is doing enough to prevent themselves stagnating. I'd be really interested to see just how they attack 2022, 1 year to the World Cup, and whether Sharks and it's just Sharks will feel they've proven their point and it's time to try and find a few more options in the backline in particular. England, on the other hand, have really embraced how much things can change in 2 years. This also feels like a major shift in how Eddie Jones approaches his England team, and with more on the line in the Six Nations that's just 60 odd days away, it'll be fascinating to see whether he tones things back, tweaks things a tad, continues building in case these two teams do happen to meet again in 2 more years' time, and Eddie has his chance to show how much things can really change in 4 years. Thank you for watching that. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you had a wonderful, wonderful time watching it. I will be moving on to France against New Zealand now. I was going to do Wales Australia, but, things move on, and I've got to talk about Ultimate Pass, which I did in the bonus podcast. If anyone wants to listen to that, I've got a podcast going on the 1987 Rugby World Cup. Go and listen to that. It's a bonus episode entirely, 45 minutes on Roman Ultimax Pass from the weekend. I'll be moving on to that very shortly. There's plenty more around the channel if you want to have a look for other games from this autumn. Deep dives, given the Six Nations, etc. Please have a fumble around, have a look around, and I'll see you very soon for France against New Zealand, the best game anyone's seen in at least 20 minutes.